Okay, hello and good morning. We're starting the stream. Had some errors there. If you ever started a stream on YouTube, one of the tips I would say is to stop any kind of backups, especially with Google Drive, because that will kill your stream. Had to figure that one out, so fun stuff. We have a lot to cover today. I got tons of items in store that I want to talk about, that I want to teach about in Krita. Gonna be a fantastic day, so I can't wait to jump right into it. So that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna jump right into it. Yeah, yesterday where we left off. Oh man, what did we do yesterday? I made notes. So I talked about the hardware I'm using, which is XP Pen, how to download Krita, how to go through the Krita I went through the Krita interface, like settings, general, resources, editing the interface font, which after a reset, all the other fonts, or after a restart, all the other fonts got bigger as well. The essentials of Dockers, basically, and the essential Dockers that you need. And I didn't really touch anything in Krita after I left yesterday, and there's a lot of things that I want to change and show you why I'm going to change those. And then keyboard shortcuts, we went over that as well yesterday, so covered a lot, and we're going to cover a whole bunch more today. I got a lot to talk about. So the first thing I want to go over let me get my basic brush that's really huge. No, I don't want that brush. I'll hit W, one of the shortcuts we set up yesterday, to get it back to its normal size. Yay. So the Popup palette, which is a lot of fun, and I don't use it that often. And one of the things that you can do with the stylus on the XP Pen, on any stylus that you have, because mine has buttons, is a right click. And for some reason, it just wasn't working for me, because if I have a mouse, okay, so I'm on my mouse right now with my brush. If I right click, I get this awesome thing. I right click again, it goes away. So this is your pop-up palette, okay? So for my pen itself, for some reason that wasn't working, and I was doing some research on it, couldn't figure out why. So I changed it to the tilde key. What is the tilde key? If you look at your keyboard, that's the key right next to 1. So if you have 1, 2, 3. So on your keyboard, there's a 1, 2, 3 at the top. It's this little icon with a squiggly line over top of it. It's that one right there. That's what I think it's called TILDE. That's what that button's called. And that's what I've set this to get to our pop-up palette. It's really great. You have a ton of options to it. This loads up your first favorite brushes, which we'll get into in a moment, because you can set my favorites over here in the brush panel, which is really nice. Oh, one thing I forgot to turn on was my mouse selector. So it shows where my mouse is. Give me 1 second. Mouse highlight. So you can see where I'm at. There I am. Yay. So yeah, over here, you can change this drop down, look at your favorites, I have all the brushes up right now because we haven't defined any favorites, but I'm going to show you how to define some favorites. So this has a lot to it. It's actually really awesome. And we'll start with the top. First, it has your color, your foreground color and your background color. And just by clicking over in this area, you can switch. So I'm on black right now. So the palette goes away and I'm painting in black. I can bring it back, tap that, and I paint with my background color. Pretty easy, although you can do the same by hitting the X key. So if I hit the X key, which is a keyboard shortcut I set to, I could quickly go back and forth from white and black, my foreground and background color. So there's that. And then we have this cool little thing here. This is your ability to rotate. So it goes all the way around, and then you can set it right back. So that's really interesting. And then obviously, well, it's not obvious. I don't know why I say that all the time. I hate obvious. You can select different brushes. So I got this other brush selected, okay? Then I can go back to it and say, no, I want the eraser, and then start erasing stuff. Yay. So I can quickly and easily select the brushes, or I could just tap over here and select the brush I need. Then we have the color picker area. So you have your basic color picker, And it does this rotation thing, which is really interesting. So I can pick my hue, like a blue here, and I can get a very gray blue if I want, and then just go back to paint on that. The one thing that's a little annoying about it is if I do some kind of selection in here, if I try to paint it first, it turns off, and I didn't paint that line. So what you have to do is, do your selection, turn off the pop-up palette, and then go back to painting. So like that. What's interesting is you'll see outside of the color picker there, you will see our palette that it's being created. You actually see it up at the top left here. It's a little bit easier to follow at the top, at the left here, because I guess this morning I was on a green color, and then I switched to a red color, and then a blue, then an orange, then black, then a white. So it's kind of like your palette history, the colors that you've selected before, which is really nice if you want to quickly and easily go back to that green that I was on earlier this morning. So there you go. And wherever your cursor is, wherever your brush is, that's where this opens up. That way it'll be really quickly for you to kind of select things. It has extra options to it. So at the right, this little right arrow, I can open that up and quickly change opacity on my brush. You can see it changes at the top here as well. So I can change that, I can change the size of the brush that I'm selected on, and I can reset everything. Now if the bottom one is already folded down, but I can fold it up. But I can quickly zoom in and out of my canvas. I can change it to 100% quickly. I can make the entire Krita full width. You can also do that by hitting Tab. Tab does that same thing. So Tab goes into this full screen mode, and then Tab brings you out of the full screen mode. And then this one's fun. This flips your canvas. It not only flips it vertically, but it also flips it horizontally as well, which is a little disorienting, honestly. What I see a lot of digital artists do all the time is they'll hit M, and that'll flip, or not H. Yeah, M does a mirror. That's what it is. It's a mirror thing. There's a way to actually just flip it horizontally as well. So that's, I don't think it's that one. No, that sets the flip. We'll get into that later, where you can flip your canvas. It's a great way to check out composition and see what your composition looks like. So all of that is packed deep into your pop-up palette. This resets your color palette. This one here lets you change to a different brush list. Like if I go to all, it'll show the top, I think, 10 of all the brushes, and I can pick that brush. And then I can quickly change that back to my favorites if I wanted to. So that's the pop-up palette picker thing. Yeah, and you can set that to almost any keystroke you want. I wasn't able to set it to my stylus, but that's okay. I don't use it that very often. I have everything over there, so I use all my tools on the left more often than the pop-up palette picker thing. So that's number one, the pop-up palette picker thing, and where I set that control to. Now the other thing that was kind of annoying me that I didn't change is this selection tool. So number one is I use the freeform selection tool all the time. It's this little icon here. It's really nice if, let's say, you're painting something. Let me go back to a brush. So I'm painting something, and then I want to quickly and easily cut out something. Like maybe I'm cutting out a face or a section of a painting, and I can just hit delete or, copy, paste, whatever I want to do. I'm on the background layer, so it's also copying the background. So let me see. Get rid of that selection, delete everything, select a new layer. The problem with it is that it doesn't have a keyboard shortcut by default. It's the freehand selection tool, so I'm going to set a keyboard shortcut by default. We're going to set 2 while we're in here, honestly. So settings, configure Krita, keyboard shortcuts, and it's freehand selection tool. So we have a freehand brush tool, that's B, which we already use. This one I want to set to just simply S, okay? And then hit OK. So now if I'm on my brush, I can paint, 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 and then I hit S, I make a selection, and I can delete. And there we go. And then also while you're on a selection, if you hold shift, you'll get this nice little plus, and you can add to your selection pretty easily. So I can continually add to this selection. And if you hold, is it Alt? Yeah, if you hold Alt, you can remove. So maybe I want that to be a very smooth arc, and it will remove that selection. So you have all these selection abilities. The one thing I don't like is to deselect something, it's Control-Shift-A to deselect. It's a bit difficult for me, and I'm used to a certain way of doing things, so that might be great for you to get used to. But I like the deselect to be a bit more simple. So, and I'm going to go with the Photoshop default because I'm used to it on Photoshop, which is Control-D for deselect. So there you go. And so I'm going to do a selection and then Control-D, deselect. Okay. Another thing that you might not be aware of, if you hit T, this is the move tool, the move a layer tool by default. If you hit T, you can just move a layer around, which is really nice. What's even more helpful is, let's say that I draw something like this eye, right? And then I draw an eyebrow. And then obviously this, well, I always keep saying obvious, but let's say this eyebrow is really in the wrong place, right? What I can do, because this is all in the same layer, I can just quickly select that eyebrow, okay? Hit T, and then move it wherever I want. So I'm not moving the entirety of this layer, I'm just moving a part of it. And if I hit Control T, then I can change it into a transform box. So now I can change that eyebrow to like an angry person, and maybe it's too big. So make it a little bit smaller and then move it down there. Maybe I want it to skew it a bit as well. You know, make those changes to it. So that's T and Control T and how you can use that. It's the move tool here, or move a layer tool, and then transform a layer tool. So that's how those can be used really nicely. All right, so we did the pop-up palette, we did the add remove selection, we did the selection tool with S, and then the remove selection with Control D. And now one thing I want to show you is I'm creating this, and I'm going to be putting it on my website for you to download. This is going to be a cheat sheet for all of the everything that we've basically added throughout this entire I guess live stream that I'm creating. I'm almost creating a course. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go selection tool. Oh no, this would be so S would be selection tool. And then let's say CTRL plus D is deselect. Okay. And I'm pretty sure the other ones are in there somewhere. I'll have to clean this up, and I'll go through and check and make sure all of these are correct. But I have a lot of them set up, and it's going to grow and grow and grow as we continue with this live stream. So cheat sheet coming soon. Be watching out for that, and I'll continually advertise it on this stream while you're here, which is good. So I hate to do it, but I need to get rid of my wonderful drawing here. I'm on a brush. Oh, painting. What happened? I'll just delete the whole thing. There we go. All right. Next item. Let me scroll back up on my list. I got so much to get through today. So the cheat sheet, brush favorites. Okay, how to set brush favorites. This is pretty easy. I use my mouse for this because it's easier to right click. So I'm on my mouse rather than my stylus. Now, you will have a bunch of brushes kind of set up in your favorite right away when you install Krita, and you may not want these, but you may. I don't know. I'm going to keep the Blender basic, But what you do to remove favorites or add favorites, let's say I don't want this eraser. I don't use the erasers out of the box. I just hit the eraser tool, which is E, to turn any brush into eraser. So you can right click on it and you click assign to tag, or remove from this tag, or remove from another tag. So we're inside the favorites area, so I'm going to remove from this tag. It'll go away. Same for that eraser. This is the airbrush. Let's check out a couple of these tools. If you hit, while you're working, if you hit D, you will go to black. That's really fun. You know, you can just get right to black really quickly. So there's your airbrush, basic airbrush. Probably use that all the time. Oh, this is a nice kind of liner tool. Brush, like you can get really tiny and light with that. It's got kind of everything to it. So I'll probably keep that. This is a pretty good pencil. It's very blurry when you get big though. It's made for really small strokes. Probably keep that. Kind of a blocky stroke item. Yeah, that's not too bad. Like a brushy kind of texture. What does it look like when we get big? Yeah, that's not too bad either. Wow, these are... I mean, right out of the box, they have a lot of really cool brushes. So we'll keep that one too. This is a wet brush. Can't really tell it because I don't have a color selection selected. But let's go through a few colors here. Like a nice orange over a green. And you can see I'm pulling up some of that black. I'm pulling up some of the green. It's kind of a blending tool. Good morning, Thinker. Thanks for joining me again. You say, don't know if you already done it, but could you go over bringing reference photos into your painting screen? Yeah, I'm actually going to be doing that later. I've already got it set up. We're going to be looking at spheres and alpha transparencies, locking alphas and stuff, and how to do that. So I'll go over that from the very beginning. Great question. Bleeboo. Hello, I just found your channel and there is amazing stuff there. Thanks for making these streams. They are really helpful. Awesome. I'm gonna screw up your name. Ilblue Bleeboo? That actually sounds really cool. Thanks for joining me. Okay, we're going through Krita, which is a free software, and I've already hit on a bunch of stuff this morning. I have so much I want to cover. And right now what we're doing is we're setting favorites on our brushes. So I'm just going through all these brushes that are already favorited, and I'm deciding what I want to keep and what I want to get rid of. So I'm going to remove this one from the tag by just right-clicking on it. And I know I want to keep this one. This one's actually a nice blender brush. It blends out really well. So if I want to soften everything really quickly, look at that. That's really nice. Now this brush is really fun. What is this called? This is called probably, yeah, distort or move. So we can distort things within a brush. I can kind of like move the paint around. I have to press really hard to do it, but that's pretty fun to do. Not going to keep it here. It's not really one of my favorites. Remove from this tag. So I'm going to go back to all brushes, and I'm using this one all the time right now. So what I'm going to do is right click on this, assign the tag, and then my favorites. And honestly, I always stay within my favorites here, okay? That's like where I'm always at as far as when I'm working. Always, you know, I have a certain set of brushes that I want, and I'm always kind of, you know, looking into it and pulling from there. So it's kind of like the toolbox you always pull from. But it's great to be able to quickly and easily go to all, and then pick from, you know, all the default brushes that are there. So really, really nice. My favorites. Okay, that's how to set up favorites in Krita. Favorite your brushes. So get playing with those brushes and get setting those up. And I'm going to take a drink. A drink of tea, by the way. No alcohol included. Okay. Now, to prepare for the next thing I want to talk about, which is I want to get into some brush creation, just a little bit. But before we do that, I want to show you some pattern creation. So I'm going to get into a crazy brush here. Let me see if I can find it. Maybe this one will work. Oh yeah, that's absolutely fantastic. Look at this. This is crazy. This is a crazy brush. What is this called? Water Sea Special Splats. Okay. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to create a texture. Okay. And it's really fun to do. Maybe I can select a color on this. And then I'm going to select another color. And I'm just holding down and it's just throwing this stuff everywhere. Then we'll go to a blue. Let's make it brighter. Let's make it really crazy. Okay. And you can, normally you can create the texture like this. But I'm going to delete all that because we're going to do it an even cooler way. And I need to zoom out to show you this because it's really neat. So there's this little button up here at the top, and it's called the wraparound mode. And you can get to it by Shift W as well, but you won't use it that often, so, or maybe you will, I don't know. But when you hit that, your canvas just gets massive. But you have to remember where that little square is, because when you paint in that square, it fills everything. And oh my God, I think I've went blind on that green. That green is crazy. Let's go with a red. And then maybe this light blue. So what this is doing is I zoom out, it's creating a pattern. And this pattern, not what I need to do is kind of go all over the place. This pattern is, will repeat instantly everywhere. So you get a perfectly repeatable pattern right away, okay? And if I zoom out on that, you can see that it repeats. It repeats really well. So when I turn this off, here's my pattern, okay, which is pretty darn ugly when you look at it, right? But we're going to change this a little bit. So I'm going to go up here to Filter. So at the very top, Filter, and then I'm going to look for Edge Detection, and then Edge Detection, okay? Wow, look how crazy it got now. So we're going to change some things here, and we're going to tone it down a bunch. So instead of Pre-Wit, we're going to use Sobel. Don't ask me what those mean exactly. I have no idea. And then we're going to change it to, let's say, left edge or bottom edge. Actually, before we do this, what I'll do is I'll go into the, I forget what it's called, the adjustment menu. So to get into this, I'm not sure how to get, well, you can go to Filters, Adjust, and it's the HSV adjustment menu, or Control U. You can get to this. And I can take the saturation all the way down. So we can remove all color because we're making a pattern for a brush, okay? And we can play with different saturation modes. So HSV is here, and that's what it looks like. HSL, which is lightness. Hue, saturation, intensity. Hue, saturation, luma, so it's changing things just a tiny bit. And then chroma, we don't want that one. So I'm going to go with HSV, hue, saturation, value, and I just tone the saturation to -100. And now everything's gray. This is really good for any layer you have or anything. If you just want to get rid of all the color or tone it down, just Control U and remove all the saturation. Pretty easy. Now we're going to go back up to the filter menu. I'm going to go to edge detection and then edge detection again, and it gets crazy. But instead of all sides, we're going to pick like right edge, okay? And look at this texture, like right away, we have a really interesting texture. So left edge, top edge, we can really pick where the light's coming from. So if it's coming from the bottom edge, you can kind of see where the, or maybe that's where the, oh, top edge. Okay, that's really interesting. Yeah, not sure where the light's coming from. I'm going to choose right edge, and then I'm going to change this radius a little bit. Let's see if we can make it a bit duller. No, I think that's fine, actually. Especially for what we're going to be using it for, this is going to be fun. Okay, so that's our texture, okay? Or our pattern, right? And we can use this for like a paper or something. What you would, if you wanted to use it as if it's a paper, you could insert a layer and get like a white and then fill that layer with white and then change the opacity over it so you kind of have this texture look that you're working on. But we're not really going to do that because you're just working over a layer there. We're going to use this as a brush pattern so that every time your brush touches the canvas, you're going to be painting with this pattern as well. So first I need to save this. So we're going to go File, Save As, okay. And there's my Krita pattern. I'm going to save it as a JPEG image. And I'm going to call this, let's just call it pattern creation. No, let's just call it pattern 1, okay. And save it there. 100% quality, leave everything there the way it is, it's fine. Okay. And then I'm going to go back to here. So we saved that pattern. Now, I want to go into my brush configuration and start adjusting brushes. So you can do that really easy. Whatever brush you're selected on, you know, I'm on maybe this brush, ZD, one of my basic brushes, maybe on one of my favorite brushes. It doesn't really matter. And you go up to this icon up here. This is called the Edit Brush Settings. So we're in here. And this has got a ton of things to it. And when you're in here, it's probably going to be closed up like this way. Maybe the scratch pad is closed up as well. Excuse me. But you want to use these little icons in the left and right to open up each side because we're going to use both. But because the first place we're going to go is to look at the engine. So Krita has different engines for their brushes. And a whole bunch of them. Pixel, Color Smudge, Sketch, Quick Brush, Bristle, Shape, Spray. I haven't played with all these. There's just so much. So we're going to go with Pixel right now, the very top one. Pixel brush. And then as I scroll down here, I'm just going to pick a brush. Actually, let's stay with this very default brush that I have. And over on the right, you got this little scratch pad that you can test with. Actually, that one has transparency, and I don't want the transparency. Which one am I on normally? My default brush. Oh, that's what it looks like. I wonder if that is a pixel brush. Maybe it's not. But no, we want to work with a pixel brush anyway, so this is fine. We'll work with this. And this is going to be our starting point. Also, if you don't want to use a scratch pad, you can also use, you know, your other, because you're adjusting this brush as you're going, right? So you can just play with it over there. So I'm going to close up the scratch pad and use it on my gray canvas. So this brush has, it looks like some kind of opacity to it. Yeah, so I'm barely pressing, then as I press harder, it gets harder. Okay, so that kind of curve that we're looking at here, from dark to light, is really the powerful part of the Krita brush engines, and the ability to just to edit that in infinitum is fantastic. So this is a first thing in here is general. We have our brush tip, and right now it's set to auto. Then there's predefined, and then there's also text. Like you could literally have text. Here's text. I'm painting with text. It's ridiculous. It's crazy. Like, why would you ever do that? But it comes in handy, I guess, with some things. And this one's selected on like the basic mask type, which they have some defaults, circle and square. Like I could change this really quickly and easily to a square if I wanted to. Circle's good though for right now. Diameter of it, like this is obvious. This is what we're kind of painting with already. If you're in here and you're messing with stuff and you want to go back to where the brush was in the beginning, there's a reset button here, so it'll go back to the defaults. Ratio. This is the ratio of the circle itself, like width to height ratio. So if I make this larger, you can see that now it's this kind of ellipse shape. So that's a lot of fun if you wanted a very thin ellipse to paint with. You got that. So your circle does all that for you. Let's reset to the size. Let's delete there. I never messed with the horizontal vertical fade or the spikes or randomness or the density. Just really these top two items are what I deal with most in this menu. There's just so much here, guys. It takes a ton to kind of really learn. Blending mode, most of them are on normal, but if you wanted a brush that was just doing color dodge, you could do that. Let me see if I can actually pick a color over here. You don't really get much of that effect here, but color dodge is actually a lot of fun. It works better with a brush that has kind of a fade to it. And then you have different modes you can pick. Burn. That does a different effect. Addition, everything. But we're going to keep it on normal right here. Playing with this is a lot of fun. Let's get into opacity next. Now, this is what I was talking about before. Let's go back to black and then remove that. So the ability to set these curves here is fantastic. So if I just uncheck this, so I'm in the opacity area and I uncheck the enable pen settings for opacity, it's just going to be black. I mean, no matter how hard I press or how light I press, nothing. But if I turn this on, if I press really light, now I got this. And you can definitely see, as I pass over the brush several times, it gets darker and darker and darker and darker. And it's really kind of garish on a very hard edge brush, these kind of lines. It's kind of like the digital look in a lot of ways. But that's what opacity does. It keeps kind of darkening the area. That texture, it reminds me of the moon. Oh, thanks, Bleebo. Yeah, that's a good idea. Like, we could paint with the moon. Amazing stuff you can do in digital art. So, and you can adjust this pressure settings however you need. You can make a nice curve. So, for example, what's happening here is the horizontal axis, bottom left, is very low pressure. So I'm pressing really light, really, really light. Okay. And then at the right is I'm pressing really hard. But then down here is transparency to opaque on the vertical axis. So the way it was before was like this. So there's an even kind of transition. As I press harder and harder and harder, it gets more and more opaque. But if I wanted a really quick transition, like I don't have to press very hard and it goes black really quickly. Just black really quickly. That's what that would do. On the inverse, like it would be super, super light. Like, man, nothing was happening there at all. Let me change that curve a little bit more. Maybe move it up this way. Like super, super, super light. And then I really have to press hard to get anything out of it. That's how those curves work. They have some ones up there that you can pick right away that are pretty natural. Nice curve this way to get, those curves in different ways. But what's nice about this is they have these curves that you can set for every single one of these settings. So if I go to flow, you're going to have it there. If I go to size, I can have it there. So there's so much that you can set here. But we're going to go back to, or we're going to pick out a particular one. Oh, their strength is selected here. So strength is another thing. So how strong? I'm kind of confused on strength for the most part. Let's turn it off. I mean, it kind of looks the same, really. I have to look into strength and see exactly what that does. It reminds me a lot of either flow or opacity, because those are different. Opacity is, how clear you can see through the brushstrokes, and flow is all about how much paint is being put down each time. Flow is actually really nice if you're getting into something that's similar to oil painting. Now, right above strength is pattern. So what we're going to do is we're going to turn on pattern. And I'm just going to select one of these patterns. Like, what is this one? This one's probably called wolf tissue. All right. So now I'm on wolf tissue. And my brush has changed completely. So I'm, this pattern is happening underneath the brush. It's like my canvas has a texture, and when I'm like painting on it, I'm only hitting the top of that texture. We have this kind of texture you can paint on. Look at that effect. This guy. I mean, these are all these textures that are already created. Here we go. If you have a tree and you want, the bark of wood to show, there you go. There's that. If you got a snake or some kind of scaly thing, here's chainmail. I can paint chainmail in an instant. Doesn't look that great, but there you go. So you got all these textures. But we created a texture. So what I'm going to do is go right down here at the bottom left, and there's this little import icon, it looks like. And this is the pattern we created, pattern 1. So I'm going to select on it and hit open. And then the fun thing is finding where your pattern went. That's some improvements that can happen. I think that's it. I'll have to hover over it and see. Yeah, pattern 1. So this is the texture that we created. Okay? And as I paint darker, you can see that I'm painting that texture. So instead of it being this kind of fake paper that I'm painting over, now it's included in the brush. And so whatever color I choose, I'm painting that texture as well. Get a darker color. I'm getting a very textural kind of feel with my brush. It's a bit overt. I mean, it's a very overt texture. It's kind of crazy, right? But we can make lots of adjustments to this. We'll go to the options tab here, and I'm going to paint down just a bit. Let me go back to black so that we can see it as it is. So that's what it is right now. I can change the brightness all the way up, and it's going to get really flat. I can take the brightness all the way down. Now you don't see anything. Let's go back to the center. Let's change the contrast all the way down. So this will get a bit more subtle. So it's a bit more subtle of a texture. And then contrast all the way up will be the opposite of that. It's very gritty. It looks like I'm painting on sandpaper, or really high grit sandpaper, or low grit sandpaper. And so less contrast kind of really takes it down a notch, so it's not as bad, not as crazy. So we're painting the moon here. And then I can change the neutral point so it's even softer. So maybe a lower neutral point, and we get just the top edges of all that texture. A higher neutral point, and I really kind of neutralize the light and dark throughout that entire texture. And how you play with this is you kind of find where you want to be on this texture. Yeah, less obvious and smaller. Scale. So we can change the scale of the texture down a little bit. So there you go. It's a bit smaller and smaller. So we're getting less and less kind of crazy with this texture. Look at that. That's just really kind of tiny. There you go. And now if you pair this with, let's say, actually before I get into that, we'll do another thing right now with this. I'm kind of liking how soft this is. And if I press really dark, you can see it fills in all the way, and I just have some texture on the edge. But like we saw with the wood and all the other things, it's kind of like the texture is set in a certain place and you just paint over it. It's like it's a texture on the canvas, and that's great for a particular effect. But what if you want to randomize it so that the texture is always random? Well, down here you can randomize, check both of these boxes, random offset and random offset on both the horizontal and vertical axis. And now when I paint, you're going to get this texture is changing position every time I pick up my pen and lay it down. So it's even more random. It gets a bit slower when I have my brush menu open, which I can close at any time and still paint with it. Working really smoothly now. And when you create textures, the maximum size or the pattern, don't use anything larger than 512 by 512, or else your brush will get a lot slower. But this is a wonderful texture right here. It's kind of nice and soft. It's like I'm painting on a somewhat soft paper. But let's improve it a bit more. So I like where that's at, okay? But the problem with it is that it's this circle brush. I mean, the tip is just a circle. The brush itself doesn't have a texture. So let's change that up. Let's change it to something a bit closer to maybe a brush. Because we're traditional artists going into digital media. Let's try this one. See what this looks like. Don't like that at all. Right away, didn't like it about this one. Nope. Something a bit more simple. This has got kind of a hard edge to it, but not so much. Just a huge brush. Let's not pick that one. Actually, the size is just massive. Maybe I'll move the size down. Yeah, that's not too bad. I'm going to go through here. This is kind of like pencil sketching kind of thing. Wow, nothing's happening with that. It probably has some settings within it that is not working. That's kind of nice. It's got this kind of chisel tip to it. It doesn't rotate. We would have to change the rotation. I really kind of enjoy these circular kind of formats of brushes. Well, for this one I have to press really hard to get anything out of it. I do like the texture though. That's actually pretty nice. All right, let me try a couple more and then we'll pick one. Oh, that's even better. Yeah, I like that one a lot. I think I've used that several times. What about this one? Looks similar. Yeah, that's a really nice texture. So yeah, let me close this and I'll try it without it open to make sure it's a fast brush, that it's not slowing down anything. That's got a really fantastic kind of texture to it. It's like a very dry brush, like with watercolor or something, that I'm painting on kind of a textured watercolor paper. Yeah. And just, by changing those few settings, I have a brush that's all my own. And if you do this a few times, probably one of the best things you can get out of this is just the learning aspect of how to create your own brushes. Because what you'll find is, oh, that's fantastic. What you'll find is you'll have certain situations where you need a brush to work for you in a certain way. This one's going to be fun. And depending on those situations, if you know how the brush engine works, then you can quickly and easily make changes because you've had this prior knowledge. Now, let's say I love this brush, okay, and I think that the perfect size for it is probably right around 60. So let's go to 60. Maybe a bit smaller. Let's go to 50. Yeah, this would be like the default size for this brush. So I want to save it. You can do two things. You can overwrite the current brush preset. That will delete the brush that you picked automatically. So you usually don't want to do that unless it's a brush you've already created, because this is one of the brushes that come with Krita. So I'm just going to save new brush preset. Oh, but before I do that, I'm going to prepare for it. So I'm on a black and I'm going to do something like this. I'm just going to do some drawing in this little square area that you see here, because we're going to use this as the image for our brush, and maybe a stripe across the top so I can see like the texture I'm creating with that brush. And so save new brush preset, and you can name it up here. I usually put everything with like my name or something. And maybe a number at the beginning. Oops. 001 Chris texture. Let me see. Dry paper texture. So the reason why I put the numbers on it is because if I go to all brushes, it should show up at the very top. 001 will help with that. So I can load the existing thumbnail, which is I have here, or I can load Scratchpad thumbnail, or I can load from an image. Maybe I have an image, like a JPEG image I want to load, or I can load an library icon. This is really cool. I can pick different icons to show up, whatever I want to show up there, different things. It's a lot of fun. I'll hit cancel on that. We're just going to load from Scratchpad, or I could have a clear thumbnail, and then I'm going to save this. Okay, so that's saved. I still am on the brush, and if I go to all on my brush presets, you'll see it's the first one there, and then I'm going to assign to my favorites. This is a brush I created, so I want to favorite. There we go. We have a cool brush that we can use to do all kinds of stuff with. What does it look like? Huge. Oh, looks great. And it still functions really fast. That's another thing. Test your brushes to make sure that they're fast. You don't want it bogging down your system all the time. All right, those are like the basics of brush creation. As you saw within there, there's like a million different choices, a million different things you can do to create brushes, but that'll get you started and get you going. I would say just play with it. It's a ton of fun. Okay. Now, we're going to paint a sphere, okay? And Thinker, where I'm finally to the point where I can show you about imagery and things like that. Let me get rid of that so I can go from the beginning. And so I'm going to hit Control O, or you can go up to the very top menu, File, Open. And I think that's kind of like par for the course for everything. And I have this JPEG reference image of a sphere that I downloaded. And I will probably provide this on my website at some point as soon as I get that up. And then as I import that, here it is. It shows at the biggest size ever. I'm going to hit the number 1 on my keyboard to get it at 100%. Then I'm going to hit the insert button, and that's going to insert a layer. We see we got a new layer over here. And now I want to create a space to the right, okay? And that's the space we're going to work in, okay? So I'm going to go to Image up here at the top, and then Resize Canvas. You can also use Control-Alt-C, as in cat. And this is a lot of fun because I can see that the width is 800, the height is 501. So I want to double the width, which will be 1600, okay? What I also want to do is change where my anchor is. I want that extra canvas width to appear on the right, so I'm going to hit the little left icon here, and it will show you this little tiny thing maybe you can't see on your screen of where the extra canvas will appear, and you can change that anywhere. Like it'd be on the left, the center, the right. It's totally up to you. So I'm going to hit OK, and now we have this extra canvas area. I don't like working on just nothing, and that's what that is, nothing there. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to hit F for fill tool. That'll get this like fill bucket. It's just F. That's right out of the box. And then I'm going to hold Control, and I'm going to pick out like this kind of medium gray that's in the image, and I'm just going to fill that layer. And then, because it was above my image, it's not showing the image. I'm going to hit the down arrow on it so it's below my image. And then insert one more time so I have a new layer so I can work on the new layer. And here's what we're going to do. We're going to paint this sphere. Yay, a lot of fun. And it's going to be a lot easier because I'm also going to show you all about alpha channels and how to use them. And it's actually a lot of fun to do this. And I'm going to show you with and without alpha channels, you know, why it's good and why it's not, or why it will help you, because it's all good. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to create a circle. I chose my ellipse tool here, elliptical selection, which is also J. And as I'm creating a circle, it's going to be this ellipse, but if I hold shift, it'll be a perfect circle. So there's my circle, and then I can grab the edge of it and move it around everywhere, wherever I want. And again, I'm going to hit F for the fill tool. And then I'm just going to pick a white color, and I'm going to fill it with white. And then we have our ball there. Okay, and that's on one layer. And then I'm going to hit Insert, create another layer, move it below the white ball we created. Control D to remove that selection. I'm going to hit J to go back to my ellipse tool. And now we're going to create the shadow. So let's do the shadow. Let's say it's like right there. Okay, so that's pretty good. I'm on a new layer. I'm going to hit D to change everything to black, and then F for fill, and I'm going to fill that with black. And do you remember how we moved a layer before? That's right, it's T. We're going to hit T, and we're going to move this layer, and what we're doing is we're matching what we're seeing over here. So I see this layer that's kind of doing that thing. Perfect. Great. And we can get into blurring and everything. You see that how that layer is kind of blurred out and everything, which is pretty cool. So this is the basics of it, okay? Now, where it gets really difficult is the first thing you'll probably do is you want to go to the paint layer 2, which is the ball layer. And I'm going to go back to the brush we created, okay? And even if I select like this dark color, okay, and make my brush really small, and I need to paint that dark layer. Oh, I'm going outside the lines. No, no, that's too difficult. No, it's not working. Not working at all. I'm going to be all out here, and then I'll have to cut that again. I'll have to do a selection, blah, blah, blah. It's not going to work too well. So this is where we get into alpha transparencies. And in order to describe this well, give me 1 second. I need to take a drink. Okay. In order to describe this well, I'm going to go to another file that I created earlier. So hopefully you can see this. This is on the left. I'm in the layers panel, and what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to make all these layers super huge. The thumbnail size is really big so you can see it, how everything's laid out. And I'm going to select my basic brush for more examples of this. Now, in order for these alpha channels to work, you have to have groups. In order to group a layer, you can easily just hit Control G, or you can select several things and hit this, I believe that's the group. No, that's the copy. Yeah, duplicate layer. One of these is a group, I think. Yeah, add group layer. So that adds a group layer, and then you can drag stuff inside of there. But it's so much easier just to select a couple things, hit Control G, and it's grouped those two items. But I already have a group here. So we have the yellow stripe, the blue ball, and the red, well, the blue circle and the red circle in the group. The white is on the very top, and the green is on the very bottom. And it's good to understand that. So if I'm working, let's say, on the top here, the very top layer, and I'm just painting over everything. You know, this is how we would work just regular with no transparency, no nothing. And that would work with every layer. So I'm on the yellow layer, you know, just basic stuff. Now, if I go to, let's say the blue ball, okay? And we have these three icons to the right, which don't get bigger when you zoom in over here. First is the lock icon. this will prevent you, if I'm selected on that layer, it will say, no, 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 this layer is locked. What's really nice is that it has this little international symbol of no there, and it it does this kind of like sticking thing with your brush, and it's like the feedback is like instant. Oh, there's something wrong with this layer, like it's locked, I can't do anything on it. So that's great. So you can, if you've worked really hard on a layer, you don't want to touch it and mess it up, you don't want to move it or do anything with it, you can lock it. So that's really cool. But now alpha is the second icon, and I'm going to turn that on. And you're like, whoa, where'd the ball go? Well, what the alpha does is it says all the pixels on this layer, and excuse me, one second. Oh man, had to clear my throat. Must be talking too fast. Anyway, so when I select alpha on this, here's what it does. It says that all the pixels on this layer in this group, okay, in the particular group, will only show if there's something painted underneath of it. So we have the red ball that's underneath of it, and the blue is actually on that red ball. I could do the transform tool, like the T tool, or I'm sorry, the move layer tool, and I can move this ball inside of the red ball, and it would not go outside of it. It would just stay within there. Doesn't show on the green, doesn't show anywhere. It's just in there. Pretty cool. I can change to my brush, and when I paint on the blue layer, okay, it's only the red ball. I can only paint on the red ball, okay, the red circle. You know where I'm going with this, right? But here's where it gets a lot of fun, even more fun in some cases. Let me change the yellow stripe to have the alpha layer as well. Oh, that's all also on the blue. So perfect. That one's there. It's on a different layer. So I can paint within that, and it also stays within the ball. Now the third icon is where it gets really fun. Let's say that I have some kind of stripe going over this red ball, okay, just like I have now. And it's great that I can't paint outside of the red ball, but what if I also want to stay inside of the yellow stripe? Well, this is where the lock transparency comes into handy. So now I have prevented my brush from going outside of yellow as well. Now you can do that anywhere. If I lock the transparency on this white one, oh, it's not, oh, I have to be selected on the white one. It's going to stay there. So it will stay inside there. So really great. So that's on the layer itself, okay? So where this is super useful, let me turn all these off, is I want a non-destructive layer. I want to paint on top of this red ball, but I don't want to touch the red ball, but everything I paint, I want to stay with inside the red ball. So I'm going to hit insert for a new layer, do the alpha, the inherent alpha to it. That's what that means. And you can see when you hover over, it'll say inherent alpha yes, alpha lock no. So now I have a layer where I can paint on this guy. It doesn't go outside, okay? And at any point in time I can get rid of it and the red is still there. And this can work in succession. So I could turn all of these on and things just go away everywhere because there's nothing under it to catch those pixels. That's basically what you're doing. You're saying all of these would completely drop through all of the layers to nowhere unless there's something to catch it. So I can go on this very bottom layer. I'll make my brush really big so you can see this. And I'm just going to do a stripe straight over. There's the blue ball, there's the yellow stripe, there's everything there. So it's all there. It's just now I put some pixels down to catch it. If I hit eraser, I can erase it back. Now there's so many possibilities you can do with that. So many possibilities. And probably the most basic of those is painting a sphere. And this is great because if you haven't done this yet in Digital painting, what's wonderful about it is it will train all kinds of things for you. I'm going to get onto my, I wanted to say hairbrush there for a minute, my airbrush. It's definitely not a hairbrush, Chris. So I'm on my airbrush, okay? And I'm going to group this layer. So Control G, now we got a group, and then I'm going to hit Insert, and now I'm going to change the alpha on that. So I have a black, like a medium gray selected, okay? And now I can paint over this ball very carefully and totally work it up into a nice form, like that, and just continue working it. Now the airbrush is kind of cheating a little bit, right? Because, I mean, I can really quickly and easily get that curve and fade, but, you know, I'm going to say this. I said cheating, but there's no cheating in art. You know, take whatever shortcuts you can. Just don't steal someone's work, or don't copy someone's work. You can steal ideas, but don't copy their work. But I can also get my blender brush and I can blend this all day long until it's like this kind of perfect thing. I don't want it too perfect. Let's get the brush that we created and let's try it here. So now I can do this with a really cool texture. Let's make it a little bit darker. And I'm looking at the ball to the left and I'm trying to copy the value changes on this sphere to the left. So it's really dark here. It's all those halftones and things. And then the dark area comes down there. And then I'm pressing a bit lighter as I go. And the one thing that you can notice here is I'm going in circular fashion. So when I'm making strokes, let me create a layer up here. Oop, let's get it outside of my group. When I'm creating strokes, I'm doing this. I'm going with the form of the sphere. I'm trying to describe the sphere in space, not only with value, but within the direction that I'm painting it in. Okay, this always helps tremendously in describing the forms that you're creating, whether it's a sphere, a square, a house, a face, or a puppy. Always giving, you know, that idea of describing the form as you're working. So this is looking kind of really scratchy, right? You know, it's not really blending in too well. I mean, the blending is kind of difficult in a lot of ways. So what's the best way to do that? Well, there's several ways. You could go back to your airbrush and use that. You could go to this blending tool and just carefully touch it so it blends. But you'll kind of lose a lot of that texture, okay? We don't want to do that. So the best thing you can do, the other option, is to go back to, you know, the brush we created. And as you're blending, okay, so right now I'm on this kind of dark color, and I'm gonna do a selection. I'm gonna hold Control, and I'm gonna do a selection that's a little bit outside the darker color. And I'm gonna use this value here, and then I'm getting a bit lighter, so I'm gonna select in there. A bit lighter, I'll select in there. And just use these kind of all over the place. So as I go, I'm changing the value to be a little bit lighter, and a little bit lighter, and a little bit lighter. And this, honestly, this brush is okay, but what I'm seeing is that as I barely press, which I normally do, it's not putting down a lot of paint. So I'm going to try and start pressing harder. And yeah, there we go. As a traditional artist, I'm always, you know, looking for that physical response, right? So pressing harder and things like that, which is a little bit opposite from when you're doing oil painting, honestly. When you paint with an oil and you press harder, it actually removes more paint from the canvas, which is kind of interesting, you know, so it's different here. And this will take some time, you know, working this way, but you'll have a sphere or an object with a lot of really interesting texture. And I think that's what's most important, you know, creating interest, you know, going the hard route on this to create a bit more interest in what you're doing. And I'm just continually selecting colors, I'm sorry, values, because we're really dealing with value here, not a lot of hue, in the areas that I'm working in. Kind of zoom out and check. And then maybe some really light texture in here. This is really difficult with the brush that has just this much texture. So it's really interesting. I could even select from my object that I'm working from, like over here. I can just select from there. Let's get a big chalky up here because I'm going from light to dark rather than dark to light. And just continually kind of work this up. Back and forth. Wow, see, that's getting pretty good. We have a ball that has a ton of texture. It's like a little tiny moon. A little moon. There we go. I love that. I love all the texture that has. It doesn't look very accurate when we get to the edges there, so the edges would have to be cleaned up. You know, I might reduce the size of my brush and then maybe get right on with those values, maybe. That kind of thing. And really get that working better. The nice thing is I don't have to worry about going outside the lines or anything like that. It's all right there. It's looking a little bit better on that edge. Let me try this edge. See if I can get that really bright highlight that's there. Yeah, that's a lot of fun. The reflected light, that really brings out a lot. This reflected light here. Okay, now let's deal with the shadow layer. So again, I'm going to go into the shadow. I'm going to hit Control G and then Insert. So I'm working on a different layer, but let's make this easier. The shadow is kind of hard. We don't want it that hard. So let's get on the blender brush. Let's see how we can do it with the blender brush. Oh my god, that goes way too far out. Make this smaller. Yeah, that's just not working. I don't like that. See, yeah, that's just not working the way I want it. Let's do this. Let's go to Filter, Blur, and then Gaussian Blur, or Gaussian Blur, right there. And as you can see, just like in an instant, it's already blurred a little bit, and we're locking the horizontal and vertical radius, and I can just kind of scroll this out until I like the blur on it. That's a bit too much. A little bit less. I'm kind of matching with what I see here a bit. Okay, that's close enough. Now we can get back into this blender brush and be really careful with it. Probably maybe just one stripe on it. Oof, that still does not look good. Something about the way that I'm blending it. Just want this to kind of fly out there a little bit. Just being really careful. This is an interesting principle with shadows, if you don't know this. And you can see it really well here. The closer the shadow is to the object, the edge will be sharper. The further away it gets, the edge will be smoother or softer, like just blurred out like crazy. And that is blurred out a bit too much. I'm going to Control Z way back. And I think maybe the best thing I can do here is to get onto my airbrush and really kind of work this with an airbrush. It's that shape that I'm trying to get. That could be a lot better. Not going for perfection here. It's going to be a little wonky. Don't forget you can hit E on any brush to change it into an eraser. So I'm on my airbrush and I'm erasing a little bit of that airbrush there to get it a bit more exact. So that's really cool. Now I'm going to jump into the top layer, do the alpha transparency on it. And yes, even though this is faded out, you know, it's like these pixels are, you know, just a very blurry kind of area, I can still work within it with that alpha transparency. And there's this really kind of cool highlight back there that's happening that I want to grab. Give this shadow some life to it. Not just a shadow anymore, it's got more to it than that. And then on the edge out there, it's going to be a little bit lighter. So the ground that this ball is on has a similar texture as the ball itself. And then right next to the ball is an occlusion shadow. It's where the darkest darks will get. Yeah. I'm gonna zoom out on that. Looking pretty good. The only thing that's not doing well is the background has got this kind of nice fade to it that I don't have, so I'm gonna do that real quick. Airbrush, select the color over here, and then just let me do it this way. Maybe a bit too much on that, so hit E, bring it back some. So that's just quick and easy. Not too much to work on that. I mean, you could work this up to be this like perfectly kind of smooth value change there. But I like the texture of it. I like how more interesting it is. I feel like this is probably a ball, if I picked it up, it would be very textural. So a lot of fun there. So, yeah, let's review. I really hit on a bunch of things today, like from the beginning. And then let's write it down. So I already have it written down. I'll just bring it onto the screen. This is day 2 of the stream. And the first thing that we talked about was the pop-up palette configuration. Right click wasn't working for me on the stylus, so I used tilde instead, which is right at the top left of your keyboard to the left of the number 1. We did S shortcut for the selection tool, and then we added the deselect shortcut, which is Control D. I have a cheat sheet right here that'll eventually go onto my website. I have notes to put that up there. It's going to take some time because I got so many things I'm working on. Oh, thanks, Thinker. I appreciate your feedback. So look for the cheat sheet. I'll be advertising that with every stream, I'm sure. Brush favorites, how to set your favorites. We're getting closer and closer to where I was on Krita until I reinstalled it. So there you go. Creating a brush pattern. Remember, it's like paint on canvas in wraparound mode, then filter, edge detection, change the settings, and then Gaussian blur if you want to on that. I didn't do the Gaussian blur. And then how to edit brush settings, and there's just so much. I didn't list anything here. And then alpha channels with sphere. Now, if you guys want, I think, you know, I like to be actionable with this. I would suggest that if you haven't already, and you want some homework to do, very simple homework, what you can do is go in and try the pop-up palette. So the pop-up palette guy, you know, try this guy, see if it works for you. That could be your homework. Have some fun with that. If you haven't set any shortcuts, do some shortcuts. It's the biggest, like, fat marker I've ever seen. Do some shortcuts. Look for that cheat sheet that's gonna be coming out. I'll get that up as soon as I can. And then play with these brushes. Just get into that menu, this menu over here, and just start messing around. Yeah. As long as you don't overwrite brush preset, you just create new ones, you can have as much fun as you want within that. So start editing your brushes. And then while you're testing your brushes, while you're having fun with it, play with those alpha presets. Set up your groups just like we did in this test here. And begin understanding alpha presets. So there's your 3 points of, or 4 points of homework, the pop-up, the shortcuts, the, what is it? The alpha transparency, and then playing with brushes. But the most important thing is have fun. Have fun. Yeah, have fun with Krita. Have fun painting and learning digital art. Wow, that was so much fun. I had a lot of fun. I think I talked continuously the whole way, and that's really cool. An hour and 16 minutes in. I have a list of things. Well, I haven't made a list of things for tomorrow, but I'm going to make a list of things for tomorrow that we can take on. So, and if you have any questions, I'll be here tomorrow at the same time, 3 a.m. Pacific time. So wherever that is for you, if you're on the East Coast of America, that's going to be 9 a.m. And then around the world, you'd have to figure that one out. All right, thanks for joining me, guys, and see you tomorrow.